Welcome to Built for This, the podcast where purpose meets performance. Hosted by business strategist and human behavior specialist Carly Pepin, this show dives into the real stories behind high-growth businesses. Let's bring life to your vision.
Hey guys, so welcome back. This is going to be an exciting interview. I have Sean Griffith with us today from Truffle. Sean built Truffle after spending 15 plus years hiring. He scaled SimpleTexting from 1 million to 40 million ARR, led 750 people as COO at Sinch, and has personally hired 1,000 people. Truffle is his answer to the screening bottleneck, AI-powered async interviews that let you stop drowning in applications and start spending time on candidates who actually matter. So welcome, Sean.
Yeah, great to be here, Carly. Thanks so much.
Yeah, I love this one. I think what you've created is amazing. I used to be the person that would screen interviews. I wasn't HR, but I was working in all these smaller sort of companies with less people. And I just remember when it was hiring time, I'm like, oh, I have to screen so many interviews right now, like all these things. So being able to just weed through them sounds amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is, I feel like a lot of businesses, it's like, where does the idea come from? And for us, it was absolutely that personal pain of like, I remember looking in, even before we had an ATS, right? Like in my inbox and just seeing like hundreds of applications roll in and like, how do you ever, really get to know somebody, even in the most minimal way possible and try and sort out who's good?
Yeah, no, it's amazing. And it's funny too, because I even feel like now in the digital age, back then it would be a lot less resumes that we would get. I remember the day where I used to hand in a resume and actually physically go to a location. And now so many people are able to apply online. I imagine people are getting thousands sometimes to shift through depending on the job.
Yeah, we often talk about this, like this sort of introduction of easy apply, the LinkedIn button where you can just go and how it's created this. It's great in a lot of ways, but also just the deluge of applicants. And I think it's a real problem today more than it has, helped in a lot of ways.
Yeah, amazing. Well, this is a really cool company. We're going to start talking about his current company a little soon. I also want to get into the first company that he was scaling because you did some pretty cool stuff there as well. So the previous company you were working at, that you actually joined it really early on. What kind of condition was it in when you started working there?
Yeah. So the company prior to this one was called SimpleTexting. It was a text message marketing company. And it was super small. Seventh person, to sort of join the company. They had been through some ups and downs previously, but pretty small. They didn't have sort of a customer team at the time. It was a lot of sort of founders still doing a lot of the conversations, which was a really exciting time to join. I had actually just wound down another company that I had started previous, and so it was, really, really good timing for me. And really interesting. Like I had no idea that when I, sort of started and met the founders, and we decided it was a good fit. I had no idea what the business did at all, and so it was a lot of getting up to speed. And then as sort of general manager and COO at that company, it was, okay, what do we do next, right? We had seen a lot of really good growth, but it was time to add a little bit of structure, sort of how do we set up a customer support team and what should sales look like and how do we organize a proper development process? And so it was really, really exciting.
Okay, that's awesome. I'm curious too, because when you first came on, what were some of the first operational steps or systems that you put in place to start to scale from like that 7% to past 20 people?
Yeah. So the first thing was, there was one of the ways that this they had really built their business was around SEO and search engine optimization, and they had done an absolutely fantastic job of this. It was really speaking to small businesses, a lot of the same stuff that we're doing today at Truffle. Um, and the sort of good and bad of that was that there was a lot of inbound inquiries, right? And so how do you start to take advantage of a lot of that traffic that's coming to the site? And so one of the first things that we did was we engaged with Intercom, right? And we set up Intercom, which we use today as well, and we absolutely love, right? And I've worked with on several businesses. But that chat experience on the site was really where we started. And then, sort of, okay, what does that look like? And how do we both support our existing customers and use it as a tool to help build new business. And then what does an actual pipeline look like, for some light sales, right? And in the beginning, we didn't have any sales, right? It was we had 2 or 3 people that we hired pretty quickly after I started. And they were sort of a mix of, customer support, customer success, and sales all at the same time. I can't even remember what we called them, but it was sort of this all-encompassing name, right, for our initial support plus team.
Okay, that's very cool.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was where it started. And then, so we grew that team, and then we started to grow our development team very, very quickly afterwards as well. And so that was sort of step one. And then, we were growing at, 100% plus year over year. And so it was sort of 7 people to 20 people to 50 people over the first couple of years. And it was really focused, very customer-centric business. So how do we constantly optimize that? And then we started to go, the marketing team was really key for us in making sure that that funnel stayed strong and that we were growing those inbound channels to keep our cost of acquisition really low.
Yeah. And when did SimpleTexting get acquired?
So it was in
Mhm.
2000,
Yeah.
or sorry, 2020, right? So it was the pandemic was really interesting for us. So it's sort of during that pandemic time. Interestingly enough, right, we were primarily based out of Miami. Although the team was entirely distributed. We were remote from day one, and we hired globally, right? So we definitely use that as an advantage. And we grew a lot during that time as companies were looking for new ways to communicate both with their customers, right, as well as their employees, and they were using text messaging to do a lot of this. And so we were acquired later in 2020 by an Australian company called Message Media,
Yeah.
who was really looking for a foothold in the US market. And SimpleTexting was, one of the largest sort of text messaging providers at the time in the US.
Okay. So the 100% growth a year, that's serious growth. How did you guys manage it on the back end to be able to keep the foundation strong enough that, someone does want to acquire you later? I think a lot of businesses, they go into sales and they go to acquisitions and they get very surprised when they're told, like, you're actually not ready. Like, we need you to fix this and come back in a couple years.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Um, Great question, right? So and funny enough, right, the intent was actually never to be acquired. A lot of businesses sort of start out and they're like, okay, our intention is to go and be acquired. And I think this was really great from the founding team, a couple of the founders. And, our focus was always just on how do we build a really great business that people love, a company that people want to work for. And that sort of answers the question, I think, around, we built a solid foundation of culture within the organization.
Hmm.
And to sort of solidify that culture, if you will, we started using, we sort of sought out a framework at some point. We realized we were scaling really quickly and we need a way to make sure that, the messaging across the organization, is consistent and that we have an operating system for growth, right? So we sort of explored a lot of different opportunities at that time. We looked at OKRs and, we ultimately settled on EOS as sort of our operating system. And we work with an implementer, over the course of a year to sort of get that off the ground. And that was, I think, transformational for us. It was really the right time to do it. And I think we started that, in sort of late 2018, early 2019. So not that long before acquisition, but enough that we had our ducks in a row by the time that we got there.
Yeah, I love that. That's actually really cool. So, you mentioned EOS. I'm scaling up certified, right? So I've done scaling up certification, which it's funny if you see it on the back end, everyone's like really intense, like scaling up versus EOS. And I'm like, they're both
Yeah,
pretty good. Like,
100%.
pick which one you love.
Yeah,
But it's really cool because I see that. It's like you got to go in, you got to implement the dynamics that actually kind of help with the grounding structure that companies are looking for, right? Like when they're
yeah,
buying, they're looking for very specific things. And it's amazing. It took you guys, like you said, you had the year of implementation and then you carry on and go forward, which is
yeah.
pretty phenomenal. And I'm curious too, because even that dynamic of the employee count going up like so high and it's 100% a year, when did leadership become kind of complex, right? When did the complexity change and get more difficult? At
Yeah.
what quantity of employees?
Yeah, so I think it was right around the time of sort of EOS implementation where that was one of the main driving factors, right? We had leaders throughout the organization, right? I think, there was myself, we had we didn't call that a chief marketing officer at the time, right? It was sort of a director of marketing and a director of sales and a director of, but we didn't have a really solid, sort of weekly cadence of getting together and helping to drive the organization all as one. It was really organic prior to that, very open door in Slack, and we communicated really well. But above that sort of probably I think it was 70, 75 people, bumping into that 100 people, it definitely started to become a challenge. And that's where we really needed that structure in place. And I can remember after our sort of first quarter and we were working on our values, getting the leadership team together, and it was really sort of a magical moment, right? Where we had solidified our values, we're getting ready to take them out to the team. And it was the moment where we knew, okay, this was absolutely the right move, and we can do something different now that we just hadn't been able to do previously.
Yeah, this is cool. How did you communicate to everyone? Because now you have that longer or larger scale. Like, what did that actual communication look like?
Yeah, we started with and it evolved, right? I mean, so one of the things about us and the way that we used EOS is, and I don't know if it's maybe isn't the right thing to say, right? But we definitely took EOS and we had our own flavor to it, right? We took a lot of what was there and we
Yep.
were really strict with much of it. But there was also some of it which we said, hey, look, it just doesn't work for us. It's not quite right. And I think the communication piece was some of it. It's not overly prescriptive in communication to begin with, but it definitely sort of suggests a cadence, right? And for us, we were really strict on sort of like a quarterly all hands meeting. Everybody gets together. Again, we're virtual, so it's, via Zoom, and it was really interactive. We had leaders give sort of key updates from across the organization, and we also had, we really wanted to make it personal. So we would
Mhm.
have teammates share fun news and exciting stories, right, in these. And I think that really helped to, keep the team connected, especially where, we had a big development team, which was in largely in Europe, right? Most of our customer team was in the US, and then we had a lot of folks in Asia as well, right? And so how do you keep everybody connected? And I think that personal, touch was really important. And then we would do smaller sort of monthly within each department, right? And then we would share from those department meetings out to the wider organization, but not sort of all together.
That's cool. I love this example. I like when people share it too, because I agree, like everything, we could go and follow something exactly to the T, but when you kind of mold it and shift it and change it to your own organization, to the leaders, the leadership team, it really changes the dynamic of a company because all this stuff, all these things that we implement, it came from someone getting creative,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like if you take out the creativity with the process, like you miss out
Yeah.
on all the cool innovation that people have. So
Yeah.
I love, yeah, finding out how people uniquely apply it within their
Yeah.
companies. Yeah. So that's
And there
really
are some
cool.
things that, like, today we even talk about as like so key and core to it, and others which, just sort of naturally fell away where it just
Yeah.
wasn't as useful to us. So one of the things, for example, in hiring that, and in performance reviews, which we really liked, was sort of this evaluation on right person, right seat. And so we still use a lot of that framework when we're evaluating new hires today, or we're
Mhm.
doing any sort of performance reviews.
Yeah, yeah, that one's a great one. That one is pretty solid. Yeah, right person,
Yeah,
right seat is like one of the ones
yeah,
that usually everyone falls and doesn't get too creative with.
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. That's really cool. I'm curious too, like before you guys decided to hire someone, like what were the things that you noticed that were challenging? What were the goals that were getting unmet that was like, okay, now it's time to bring an outside individual on?
Yeah, I would say it is one of the things that allowed us to be really successful, right? Is that we were bootstrapped, right? So we had taken on no money prior to being acquired. And so we were maybe a little conservative, I think, in our hiring because we were spending our own, money effectively that we were making. We were cash positive, which was really good. But we were always really thoughtful when we went to hire. We would try and see it enough in advance that we weren't getting too far behind, but we were also willing, in most cases, to wait to find the right person. And that was one of the reasons why we sort of founded Truffle after was, I think we were pretty successful in this, right? In really waiting to find the right people and understanding how you find the right person to fit in an organization. And so the goal is, can we bring that to more people? But back to it, right? We would generally rely on the leaders to sort of flag to us as they started to get to the point of needing it, and then we would get together as a team and discuss, sort of what are the merits of adding an individual, right? And how much what sort of advantage does it give us in bringing somebody new into the team, whether it be on the customer team in sales, right? And how does an extra person drive additional business? It could be on the support team and making sure that the customer support team is handling tickets. But also one of the things that you find often there is that with high volumes of tickets, right, which we did, we have very high volumes of tickets. We were dealing with 18,000 customers. Is that it can cause anxiety on that team if they don't have it. So it's both, strategic, right, defensive and offensive, oftentimes when you're looking at hiring, and we would try and look at it, sort of both ways.
Okay. No, that's definitely fair. And even that dynamic, so it sounds like you guys as leaders really were collaborative. Like it sounds like you guys really got along well. Hey everyone, it's Carly. If you're really resonating with what we're talking about and want to get clear on what truly drives you, what your core values are, head on over to my website. In the tools and tips section, there is a free values assessment. And this is a quick exercise that's going to help you to uncover what actually matters most with you so you can lead and live with more clarity, fulfillment, and momentum. So what did you do to nurture that relationship, build it, keep it on the back end that people aren't seeing?
Yeah, we communicated a lot, right? And I think the same as we did, in the sort of, quarterly meetings is, in all of the interactions, it's always been something really, really important to me, right? I got on a call with one of my colleagues today, and the first thing you do is, like, how was your weekend, right? Like before we get into any sort of work is, we're humans first, and we're here to do a job. But if we build strong relationships with one another, it's so much easier to do that work. And so I think that was key, right? Is we wanted genuinely to know about one another, and we cared about one another. And at a relatively small scale, it's pretty easy to do. And not only was it via Slack or a Zoom call, but also in person. So although we were a remote team, we were really keen and thought it was really key to get together in person to help, continue to foster those connections. And so as a leadership team, we would do it 3 times a year, if not more, because oftentimes we would do sort of smaller department meetups where some of the leaders would get together to help reinforce message and get to know folks, even if it was sort of cross department. And so I think that was something that really helped us, especially in an almost entirely remote environment.
Yeah, that's awesome. I like the get-togethers. I also feel like it gets you out of like your normal comfort zone, and it gets you kind of out of your head, and you think differently because you're seeing things differently because your experience is different. You wake up in a different bed, you see the world in a different way. It's really quite fascinating. So I think it's really smart when leadership teams like get together in new spots.
Yeah, some of our best moments, I can clearly remember them in my mind, right? Being in this little room in Barcelona at a meetup, right, where we were doing a review of the team, and we decided to make this, sort of pretty major change in the structure of the organization. But it was a massive unlock for us. And I can tell you, in person, if we weren't in person, I don't know whether we would have had that same conversation.
Wow. Yeah. No, that's actually really cool. It's very true.
Yeah.
And everyone gets excited. The energy's different.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah, that's cool. And so when you transitioned out of this company, like when did you exit?
So we were acquired in 2020 by Message Media. So they were owned by a PE firm, and the group of companies, so there was a number of them. They had purchased, sort of 10 different companies. They were, owned 70% of the Australian market at the time, and were growing in the US, was acquired by another publicly traded company called Sinch. And so as part of that acquisition, I stayed on and I became COO at Sinch in their sort of SaaS division. And I was there for another 3 years or so, I guess 2.5 years. And I mean, that was a sort of wild time going from a team of SimpleTexting was about 150 when we were acquired, or a little just shy of that, to, a 4,000 person publicly traded organization. And so, it was a big shift and change through that time. And I ended up leading product strategy and operations for Sinch as a group before I left. And that was really interesting. They had been a very small team themselves, 600 people, and they acquired 4 really large brands globally and brought in a ton of people. And so we were going through a big, how do you meld these 4 giant companies into one that sort of works together? And so that was another really interesting challenge.
Yeah, that's cool. How did you do that, by the way? I want to know.
Yeah, not entirely successfely, I would say. It's not done yet. I mean, that's the thing
It's
about,
really hard.
yeah, it is really, really hard, right? I mean, and
Especially
this
all
is
at once.
this was, yeah, it was a huge learning for me, right? In sort of what to do, and also I saw a lot not what to do, what not to do in those sort of situations, right? Things that I would do differently over again. I think this is where we probably missed on the people aspect in some cases. How do you, with 4,000 people, how do you get people meeting and wanting to work together? And I think we could have taken more steps to do that early on, where we took it really slow, right? Which was sort of the approach, is protect the revenue in the beginning from these businesses and bring them together. So yeah, look, I think lots of learnings.
Yeah, it's a difficult task. It's definitely a
Yeah.
difficult task. And when you left there, like what made you like what was next? Like was it
Yeah.
going straight into Truffle or did you do something else?
Yeah, so I mean,
Mhm.
this was like sort of a wild ride over 7 years. And in the end, Sinch was based out of Sweden, but I still had, a lot of team in Australia and in the US. And so it was sort of at the point where I didn't sleep very much anymore. And I had, a young daughter, she's 7 years old. And I felt that I was at the point where if I didn't change something, right, I was going to start missing things. And that's never, I never want to look back with regret. I don't regret anything I did. And I sort of never want to look back and with that. So I made the decision, right, that it was time for something else. Not only was it just time for something else in the schedule, but I've had this sort of entrepreneurial spirit for a long time, right? I grew up in a family where both of my parents were entrepreneurs, and so I saw a lot of that growing up. And not to get too ethereal, right? But I think there's sort of this idea of a bit of a life force, right? And I only have so much to give. And so I decided that it just wasn't the thing that I wanted to give myself to anymore. And that
Mhm.
starting something on my own and was really where I wanted to lend my craft to.
Yeah. When you decided to start Truffle, was it something that you came up with? You came up with your co-founders? I'm also curious, like, was thinking about
Yeah.
having co-founders a natural thing, or did you just say, "Hey, I want to get together and like talk to you about this thing"?
Yeah, it was very natural, right? It was a couple of people who I spent a lot of time with, sort of, we had a couple of discussions previously about this idea, about, how do you tell if somebody's good, right? What
Hmm.
does a great hire look like? And we were pretty aligned. We worked together previously. And so, there was this really natural fit. They were, if I think about some of the best people that I've ever worked with, they were sort of 2 of these people. And so if you can imagine a world where you go and start a business and you could do it with 2 people that punch above their weight and that are just, absolute superstars, it really sort of felt like the right move. And the idea was it was communal. We had all sort of talked about this. It wasn't exactly what we're doing today, of course, right? But it's not too far off. And I think the future of what we may do will look more like that original idea. I think we're sort of on a path to get there now.
That's awesome. And if you don't, I don't know if you can share it, but if you can share it, I'd love to know like what the original idea is, where you guys are going.
Yeah. So,
Hmm.
if we think about the original idea, part of this was in 2022, so it was like very early AI. But we had started using Gong. I don't know whether you've seen or used Gong before, but it's sort of the
Not yet.
sales tool, right?
Hmm.
It's a really interesting sales tool. It basically sort of sits in on your Zoom conversations in sales, and it helps to pull out it analyzes the call afterwards, and it will basically say, here's how much you spoke and how much they spoke, and you can give it basically a structure that you'd like to have on the call, and it'll rate you. And so it's a really great way to help coach your sales teams. And so we started using this, and we said, well, hiring is a real challenge. I wonder if you could build something similar for hiring and, sort of make it a bit of a live coach on an interview, right? Where it could know a little bit about the candidate, and then it could help to guide the interviewer on where they should go with questions, what sort of questions they would ask, and then it would help to, sort of analyze and rate the candidate afterwards, which, may be a part of Truffle at some point in the future. If you could imagine, Truffle today does one-way video interviews, but then there's a module that comes next, which is like, okay, now we're going to go to a live interview, and how can we help to make that live interview even more valuable than it is today, and providing some structure and helping to sort of evaluate that. So that was the original idea, and we sort of worked back to, okay, but what's the problem that we're really solving today? And the problem that we're really solving today is this high volume of applications more than anything.
Yeah, this is very cool. I love that. Also, it sounds like a great idea as well. I feel like there's always room for improvement. So why not? Yeah, dive in,
Yeah.
get that feedback. That's very cool because it's a conversation that usually people aren't sitting in on.
Yeah, that's right. There's
Yeah.
this wonderful article that I have saved that I come back to time and time again, and it talks about this sort of interviewing and how most interviewers, they're sort of thrown to the wolves in the interviewing experience, right? You think of a new hiring manager who's never hired anyone before, and maybe they get a quick crash course on, or a one pager on, like, you should go ask these questions and this is what you should be looking for. But that is a tough job to sort of fill. And so, there's a bunch of different frameworks out there for interviewing and hiring. We lean a lot on the Who methodology for hiring, for instance, or we did at SimpleTexting, and now we've sort of, again, molded that and some EOS and a few other things. But if you think of a new hiring manager, if they had a tool to actually help them get better at hiring over time, it seems like that could be a nice piece of kit at some point in the future.
Yeah, that would be amazing. And I'm curious too, because why choose applicant screening? Like, was it just based off past experience? Were you seeing other problems with other people? Like, what brought that forward?
Yeah, I think it was, the most painful part. So it's two pieces, right? One, it's a really painful part of the funnel, right? It's just like sorting through applications. It's such a thankless task in a lot of ways. I remember this one role that I hired for, and I just remember spending, like, it was such a critical role that was actually like a COO at SimpleTexting after I had left and was working at Message Media. And I remember interviewing just like an absolute ton of people and going through every day. I would sit and go through 50 resumes and, schedule some interviews. And we had some folks to help, but for, sort of an exec level role, I was a little more hands-on. And that was sort of the role where I was like, there's got to be a better way to do this particular part of the operation.
Yeah, the pain of it.
Yeah. The pain of it. So, and then the second side is, as our team is really, sort of practiced in SEO. And so as we started to look at the market and the market opportunities, we saw the sort of one-way video interview as a bit of a wedge into the market, right? There was space in this market that there's lots of competitors out there, and some who do it reasonably well, but they're targeting sort of different areas of the market. So you have folks who are sort of tapped into the enterprise market or verticals in particular, but nobody in this really sort of what we call SMB plus space. So if you think, founders or small businesses, those who are doing high volume hiring, let's say a call center or something, there's no sort of self-serve sign up tool today out there that works as well as I think Truffle does. And so it gave us a great sort of story to go to market and start capturing some traffic pretty quickly.
Okay, amazing. Yeah, that makes sense. It's interesting. And why do you think people don't go after these smaller company? I understand like enterprise probably hires a significant quantity of people, but you're right. Like call centers, it's just
Yeah.
massive overturn. So I'm curious why you think people aren't going after the smaller market.
Yeah, I think it's, we found some of it out for
Mhm.
sure as as part of this, right? And we sort of knew it going in that a lot of it is very, it's very churny, right? When you're only bringing in, a couple hires a year, are you going to pay for a software application for the full year? No, you're probably going to pay for it when you need it and then not. And that sort of unpredictable monthly recurring revenue, right? Which is not great for a lot of businesses. That said, I think that you can create a lot of stability there, right? By finding some of the right businesses and looking at that as sort of like top up revenue as you go. And that's sort of how we look at it today. We still provide a tool for them. We built it in a way that's very self-serve, so it's very low cost for us to operate. There's not a lot of sales or support that's sort of required of it. And that allows us to, focus on some of these sort of mid-market customers, which are hiring more consistently, more volume, right, and more predictable, but still offer something to those businesses, which we frankly really value.
Yeah, very cool. And even this dynamic of shifting into this business, right? Like, what would you say are the things in operating that have really been helpful that you've taken from your lessons building these other companies?
Yeah. Oh, so much. I mean, this was the game, right? It's part of the challenge. Part of the reason why I wanted to start a company again was you just learn so much from
So
those previous
much.
experiences. It's when I look back on it, it's absolutely wild. And so it's how can you take that knowledge, the things that you learned that really worked and the things that didn't, right? And can you do it faster, right? So
Yep.
I'm pretty competitive. And so it's, can I grow faster? Can I bring more customers? Or can I, drive revenue and make the team even happier, right? This time around. And so I think that was a lot of the sort of challenge. And a few things that we did from day one, right, is we started with EOS from, sort of the very founding, one of our very first meetups, we got together and we said, okay, what are our values? At SimpleTexting, we did it 5 years into the business,
Yeah.
which was really great. But, from day one, we now can talk about that with new hires, right? As we bring people on board and we hold ourselves to account to it as well, which I think is really important as founders, to do those things. So that's one piece, right? Setting that up from day one. Um, and then the other big one is just how we stay close to our customers, which was something that we did previously, and really making sure that we have a strong pulse on what's happening out there. We are certainly driving some of our roadmap. I think, you know, there's this sort of Steve Jobs quote, right? Is that people don't know what they want, right? And you're sort of often predicting what the future looks like, and that's not always the case. So we're doing a little bit of that, sort of looking into our crystal ball of the future. But most of our roadmap is driven by our customers and sort of what they want and need, which is so much better. You don't want to build something only for no one to use it. So we've really leaned into our customers and even our prospective customers, right? Our sales calls and demos that we're having to help drive that roadmap and what we're doing and how can we just get better every day.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm curious too, because how are you collecting that data from your customers? What's the system in place to make sure you guys have all of the data to understand them at this depth level?
Yeah. So, we love tools. We try and keep the staff pretty limited because then you can go absolutely wild today, right? There's just so much out there that you could potentially do. So for us, we started using Granola, which is this like really cool tool a little while ago. We're a big fan of Lenny's podcast, and they had this, wonderful sort of tool set that you could buy. And so we started right that with the way that we sort of fell in love with it. So it helps us to analyze all the conversations that we're having with sales prospects or with customers, or we often even use it internally and sort of pull all that data out in a really nice, simple way. And then we use a bunch of tools for tracking, our customer usage as well, right? We use Keep, right, which is sort of an analytics tracking tool, but ultimately everything sort of comes back to Notion. We're huge Notion users, and so everything sort of lives there, and then we can sort of sort through it and get some insights and ultimately go out and build.
Yeah, you remind me of my husband. He loves apps and all the tools and technology. I'm like the worst. I'm like, just tell me what we're going to use and I'll use it and then I'll learn.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
uh,
100%.
how do you pick them? There's so many out there. And for someone who's not as excited, just sit down and mess around. Like, I'm curious how you pick them.
Yeah, it's it's a lot of sort of playing around, right? It's generally it's
Yeah.
like, okay, I have this sort of use, and today it's a little different, right? I'll probably go ask Claude and ChatGPT, hey, what would you recommend? And then I'll go and try one or two of them, and I'll say, okay, yes, it does, or no, it doesn't do what I want it to do. It's so funny too, like, I was doing something the other day, and I, was chatting with Claude, and it was like, okay, go and do these things and try these tools. And generally it's pretty good, but this time it was just like a total miss, right? It was like so bad. But I think it was because the tool that it was recommending was like one of the competitors, right? Like, Gemini could do this thing, and so it wasn't gonna say go use Gemini, right? So
Yeah.
first time I ran into that.
Oh, it's hysterical. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's helpful. It's helpful to use AI to get the AI programs to help you move faster.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Hey everyone, it's Carly. So, if this conversation is really hitting home and you want to get a real snapshot of what's working and what's not in your business, head on over to my website in the tools and tips section and you can have the business performance health check. In just about 15 minutes, you're going to see where the friction is and where your next growth opportunity lies within your company. Oh, that's really cool. And so what else do you guys do now? Are you guys still doing the same thing? Do you meet quarterly in this new leadership team? Is that the same sort of dynamic? You're kind of meeting up in different spots?
Yeah, absolutely. It is for sure. So as a leadership team, we have been meeting just about quarterly over the last year and a half or so, since we sort of started Truffle. We missed a quarter actually, right? This is really busy over the course of the holidays and whatnot. And we sort of struggled through a little bit, and then we got together, and this was like, the moment that Truffle really, sort of started to make waves was after this meetup. And so we said, no matter what in the future, we are making time to get together no matter what, because it is just so critical. So yeah, absolutely. We're still getting together, still meeting. And we try to pick a different place that's somewhere, right? We have folks in the US, in Europe, and I'm in Canada. And so we're trying to, how do you find a place? So we're actually going to Portugal next. So that should be a fun one.
Oh, that's awesome. That's gonna be so much
Yeah.
fun. I've never been, but I'm actually going this year too. So that's gonna be fun.
Ah, nice. Very good.
Yeah. That's fun. And then so Truffle is really like an AI first kind of dynamic, right? So what does that actually mean operationally? Because you guys have a very lean team now.
Yeah.
Hmm.
We are, and it's just incredible what you can accomplish today, right? With leveraging AI. So, you know, we use AI in Truffle today to help evaluate candidates. We never make decisions with AI, right? So, but we leverage AI a lot to help just surface better signals. And as a team, we use it, a ton as well. For example, we're launching sort of two new features in the next couple of months. And so we were going through and getting ready to build our content for this. And our chief marketing officer, who's like an absolute wizard, right? He goes through and, he shows me the spreadsheet today of like all the content and the content gaps and, sort of how we'll target this. And I was sort of equating it to something that we had done previously at SimpleTexting. When we were going to launch a new feature. And it took us about a month to go through and build this same sort of content map. And it probably wasn't as good, frankly, right? Because it was a lot of humans going out and looking at a lot of data. And he did it in 2 hours yesterday. And so I think that's where, if you can be really smart about how you sort of
Yeah.
leveraging AI, it changes how we can operate today.
Yeah, that's amazing. I mean, it's like life-changing when you actually leverage it wisely. So when you bring new people on, are you looking for them to have AI skills or are you willing to train them on AI? What's that looking like now?
Yeah, we are. Look, we have a preference for openness, I would say, which is what we would look for. If they've got the experience, wonderful, right, really good. But I think that today it is just evolving so fast. Yeah, somebody's got to have a basic understanding, but it doesn't matter if they don't have a deep understanding because it's different than it was even a couple of weeks ago, right? We're about to embark on a new project, and we were thinking about this exact problem, right? We have a developer and a QA who are sort of mildly using AI, but we think that there's like a next level that we can get to. And so we were having this conversation with them just the other day of sort of how we can leverage it and use some of the experience that we all have as a sort of founding team to get them to that next level, right? Not only for Truffle, but who knows what the future holds, right? We want to make sure that the
Yeah.
team is just well equipped to succeed in a really different future world.
Yeah, it is really changing. And it's I mean it's a great question because it's not like how can AI replace you? It's like how can AI enhance what you're doing? How can it help you to actually, do a better job, like get a better result, which I absolutely love, which I think is just the way it's gonna shift our world
Yeah,
in the long run.
that's right.
Yeah. And I'm curious too, because with AI, like what would you say it actually eliminated when it comes to job positions that doesn't reduce quality?
Yeah, so I think that for the founders especially, right? Like we have been, sort of big on using AI personally, and so it's probably delayed like a bunch of hires for us we don't have a product designer, for example, right? We, have leveraged AI to help build our design system and then
Mhm.
do a lot of those things. So that's a role that we would love to have, and we will have someday. Ideally, somebody who is really smart at using AI to help build product designs. But for today, it's something that we didn't have to spend capital on, which just allowed us to spend money in different ways. So that's just sort of an example of where we've put some energy. Same with marketing. On the marketing side, from an analytics perspective, right? We've been able to sort of push some of that off and do a lot of it on our own.
Okay. I'm curious too, because what makes the decision of like, we'll get AI to do this versus we'll get a human to do this?
Yeah, I think it comes down to, I think there's this idea of craft for us that we sort of look at, and
Mhm.
it's what's the sort of quality and time trade-off that you look for? And then there's this idea of, is it something that you need that human touch to do? That I think they call it taste, right? In that AI just doesn't have.
Yeah.
And so, for us, that's definitely something that we look for, right? Is it something that you just can't replace with AI today? And if so, then we would make the decision to spend some money there. For instance, our content, although we may build outlines and some other things using AI, a human writes all of it in the end.
Yeah. Okay. No, that's really smart.
Yeah.
And I'm curious as well, because you guys also come from a lot of different cultural backgrounds, right? What did your core values wind up being for Truffle?
Yeah, so it's funny, we have this idea of craft, right? And craftsmanship. So that is one of the things that we really value, is this idea of craftsmanship. There's also intentionality, right? Everything that we do is intentional. And so we sort of base a lot of our decisions on that.
Mhm.
Um, we have this idea of humility, right? And so the actual sort of value that we have there is what we call reflect and correct, right? We're sort of constantly evaluating what we've done, and we're deciding, whether we take would we repeat that, or would we take a different action next time? And then we look at, we call it self-winding, right? But we look for people who have that autonomy, right? And that get up and go, and that entrepreneurial spirit to sort of make it happen.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And when you guys came up with these, like, how did you come up with them? Because again, you guys are from different cultures, different backgrounds. And so sometimes I know there's clashing perspectives, clashing cultures.
Yeah, and we debated them too. It wasn't
Hmm.
like an instant, oh, we have this. So, the exercise that we did was a little bit of reflection on, hey, what is it that, as individuals, we value most? What would we want if we? The biggest thing we did, actually, now thinking about it, was we looked at the teammates that we've worked with in the past, right?
Hmm.
And what are some of the values that they brought to the table that we would like to see future teammates sort of reflected in? And so we started with this list, and
Yeah.
that's where it really came from. And then we, sort of bundled them up into various groups, and we said, okay, put them all up on sticky boards, and moved them around and created these groups. And we said, is there anything sort of here? And that's where we started to drill down into, I think, a list of about 10. And then we ultimately said, hey, look, these are the 4 things that really represent Truffle.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. And when you guys keep them implemented, like how do you make sure that they're within the culture? Like they're actually so
Yeah.
strong within the culture that even employees, you guys are doing it on a daily basis.
It's funny, so one of the key things is really just is using those exact words, right? And talking
Mhm.
about it. And so, some of it is said in just a little bit, right? But, this idea of sort of reflecting and correcting, right? So as we're making decisions and we're reevaluating, we're often coming back to that language, right? And that sort of reflecting on it, right? And do we correct on it? And then intentionality is the one. I think in most companies, there's usually sort of one or two values that really stand out. And so we see this one coming up a lot in conversation. And I think as founders, when we're using it with the teams, you find them naturally using these things as well, and calling people out, right? Good, bad, ugly, right? When we see things that are, for the values, I think most important is, can we call it out when we see something good, right? And when a really sort of intentional move is made, or correcting as well, right? When we, that's part of that reflect and correct, right? So we see those sort of two sides of this.
That's cool. When you guys do the reflect and correct, how have you trained individuals to actually enforce that without coming off as kind of harsh or being dicks every now and then? Because it can happen.
Totally. Yeah. A big part of that is reflected in this sort of humility, right? Is that at SimpleTexting, it was one of our core values as well. It was said a little bit differently, right? There was some set egos aside. And so, and that for us was probably our most important value. And we saw people sort of acting on this every day, right? Or acting in this way. And so, I think it's the same sort of thing is, right? Look, there is no consequence to doing something wrong. That my sort of, everybody who's worked for me will probably say that I've said this at one point or another is, there's nothing that you can do that really is going to take this ship down today. So I'd rather you make a decision, right? And we can come back and let's reflect on it together and we can decide whether it was the right one, but really empowering our teams and knowing that, we support them and what they do. And so that's, I think that's one of the ways that we help to support that value.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think it's really helpful, especially when employees can make mistakes. Like, it's really helpful. It's a game changer. Yeah.
Yeah, we are all human,
Yeah. Yeah. I've been the employee many times, and when I can make mistakes, I got really creative. I got really innovative. And those are the companies where I could just be like, hey, I don't want to be an entrepreneur anymore. And they're like, we'll take you back. But I did the best because they let me do the best.
That's right.
Not because I am the best, but you let me. You got it out of me. So I think it's a big deal.
Incredible amount of growth happen in people. Our leadership team at SimpleTexting was entirely made up of folks that we had started, on the front lines. So we never hired an executive, right? They came up through the organization, and I think it was because we gave them the ability, right, to grow by making mistakes and learning and going out and just doing the things.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. It actually makes sense. It's like if you want to hire up in your team, give them the opportunity to actually grow. So it's not like you're over supporting them, over coddling them, or else you won't have a leader to move forward.
That's right, yeah.
It's very cool. So also in your free time, I know that you are also doing marathons. So tell us a little bit about marathons and how you even feel it's helping you with your companies. Because I think people kind of discount how amazing some stuff like this is.
So true. I couldn't live without it. I'm looking outside my window and it's snowing here, and I'm thinking, I'm not going to go for a run today. Well, I already ran on the treadmill, right? But I want to get outside so bad.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So I started, just before SimpleTexting. Actually, I think I ran my first marathon, the month after my daughter was born. And my wife, she's sort of like toting her around, on this 40-kilometer course, getting in the car and in and out. Anyways, wonderful time. And I've run, I think, 18 marathons since then. So, pretty busy, a couple a year. But for me, it is that, mental clarity that I get from getting out and hitting the pavement and sweating a little. And, it's an opportunity to get out of my head and get it into my head at the same time in a different sort of way. And so that's been really key part of my mental health, right? Along with physical health, obviously, at the same time.
Yeah, that's very cool. I think it's very important. It's like everyone has to like find their own thing. I love working out, but man, if I don't get to listen to my audiobooks while I'm doing it, I'm not a happy camper. It's like my audiobook time. And then I just get out and I'm like, oh, even after this morning, I'm like, oh, I have a new idea. I didn't even realize I was like off there. And I was like, duh, Carly, how did you not think of that? So I have like a new task today to shift something around completely because I'm like, how did I not think of that?
Totally. Yeah, the number of times I have stopped, pulled out my phone and jotted a quick note, right? Because I'm like, if I don't put this down right now, the thought pops into your head, like I'm toast, I'm never going to remember it.
Yeah, I'm going to forget it. And this one's good. This is worth remembering.
Yeah. This one's good.
Yeah, that's really cool. And now even your family life, how do you make sure to protect your family life, your personal life, while making sure that Truffle is still growing, scaling, becoming what you guys would love it to be?
Yeah, I would say it's been very intentional, in doing that, right? Bringing it back to one of the truffle values, but also I think it's just a good value, for me personally, is that, there are sort of some sacred things where, it's my time with my family, and I think the team knows that and understands that. I'm always there for my daughter in the morning, right? And getting her up and getting ready to go to school. There's always, we always eat dinner together, no matter what. Right? Look, I'm very fortunate to work from home, and so I have that opportunity. And for me, I focus a lot on um, not working, being really intentional with how I spend my time, right? We have
Mhm.
fewer meetings today, right? We're a smaller team, which is helpful. Fewer meetings, right? More time to do sort of deep thinking work. And I think that it's been really key for me. There are 3 hours a
Mhm.
day that I have blocked off, and I turn Slack off and I don't do anything, but really sort of like that deep work. And it's just incredible what you can accomplish,
Yeah.
right? With just making sure that there's really good balance there.
Yeah, I think this is actually an important thing to talk about too, because even the deep thinking work, a lot of, I would say, founders, owners, even executives, they constantly think like it's all about the physical dynamic and the physical aspect of work. But
Yeah.
share a little bit more about that deep thinking work, because some of the top business owners on this planet, like they're putting that same time aside because of how
Yeah.
valuable it is.
That's right. I think this came as a sort of reflection from my time at Sinch, right? Is that um I was working a lot, but the amount that I felt like I was actually accomplishing, right, in
Yeah.
delivering something was relatively low, mostly because the context switching between a million different things, and it was meetings, and then what's the value of this meeting, and many of them felt very, very low. And so when I had an
Mhm.
opportunity to sort of reset on that, right, I went back to deep work, right, this book, and very popular, and sort of reread that and a number of other things, right, and sort of settled on this idea of, if I could focus in for a couple of hours a day, right, and be more intentional with the way that I crafted my schedule. Morning, I always have a stand up with the team, and a couple of an hour to do some work, and then I sort of go into this deep work period. It's truly incredible what you can get accomplished. And it doesn't mean that, the team just understands I'm available to them outside of this time. And if it's really critical, of course, I'm going to respond. But for the most part, if you set the business up well, it sort of handles itself, right? If you've got the right people in the right places, it affords you the time to do those things. And we've been able to move, I think, much faster as a team because of it.
Yeah, that's beautifully shared as well. Right people, right place, get your systems, get the operations in place, and then you can afford to have that time, which is also kind of time you can't afford not to have. So
Yeah, that's right. That's
it's
right.
catch 22. Yeah.
Yeah, and there have been periods where, I haven't had that same sort of availability, whether it's like, you're sort of scaling, you're working on bigger projects. Man, it is like, to have that time back is so nice, and you realize how much you could really get done.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming today. I feel like we've gotten so much cool information. There's amazing insights. And tell people where they can find you. Where's the best place to go to check out Truffle?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's hiretruffle.com, right? It's the website. Check it out there. Lots of great information. Um, there's free trial, so you can check it out yourself, and sort of see what it looks like.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you again so much for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I love the conversation. Thanks so much, Carly.
Yeah, if you guys enjoyed it, if you really got some insights out of the conversation, definitely forward, share, like, and yeah, we really look forward to seeing you guys again for the next show. Thanks again.